The Valerian Palace's tall glass towers had never been this loud before. 3 little cubs had been crying non-stop for 7 days. Their small voices echoed through every hallway and room, making everyone in the palace feel scared and helpless. The big window that looked into the royal nursery was behind Empress Kara. Her silver fur, which is usually smooth and perfect, was sticking up in all directions. She hadn't gotten a good night's sleep in a week. She heard her babies crying every time she closed her eyes. The 3 cubs were sleeping in their own beds in the nursery. These weren't normal beds. They were the galaxy's most expensive and high-tech sleeping pods. The temperature changed on its own to keep the cubs completely comfortable. The soft lights glowed in colors that were calming. There were soft sounds in the background that were meant to make the cubs feel safe and sleepy. But nothing was working. The cubs kept crying. Their little paws reached out for something that wasn't there. Their eyes were tightly closed, and every time they cried, their mouths opened wide. It was hard to watch. Chancellor Vorin walked over to the Empress. He was her most trusted advisor and had worked for the royal family for 30 years. But at this point he even looked like he had lost. His long ears were pressed flat against his head, which is a sign of deep worry in their kind. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "we have now brought in 12 different experts. Kara kept an eye on her cubs the whole time. And none of them have been able to do it. The cubs still won't eat. No matter how we make it, they won't drink the formula. And they're signs of life." He stopped, obviously not wanting to say what came next. "The medical team says their vital signs are getting worse. Their hearts are beating too quickly. Their body temperature keeps going down." He didn't need to finish the sentence when he said, "If this goes on." Kara understood what he was saying. Her babies were in danger. She pushed one paw against the glass window and wished she could just reach through and hold them. But every time she tried to comfort them, they cried even more. It didn't make sense. She was the mother of them. "Why didn't they want her?" she asked, her voice tight with desperation. "What about the new thermal pods we ordered from the Zenith Corporation?" "Already set up, Your Majesty. Set to the exact specifications. They can change the temperature by less than a degree. But the cubs don't pay attention to them." Kara's claws made thin scratch marks on the polished marble floor. She didn't even see it. These 3 cubs were more than just her kids. They would be the next leaders of the Valerian Empire. There were billions of people living in the Empire, which covered 40 star systems. And the people who would inherit all that power couldn't even sleep well. "What about the comfort sounds?" she asked. Vorin shook his head and said, "The ones that Professor Thane made? We've tried every pattern and frequency. Old Valoria lullabies, white noise, heartbeat simulations, and even recordings of your own voice, Your Majesty. Nothing works for more than a few minutes. The pheromone diffusers? They don't work either. We have used the standard formulas, made our own blends, and even looked at old recipes from the Royal Archives. The cubs don't answer." Kara felt something she didn't often feel, real fear. She had led armies. She had talked to alien species that were hostile. She had made choices that changed the lives of billions of people. But she couldn't help her own kids. The palace staff moved quietly around them so as not to bother the Empress. But she could tell they were worried. People were already talking behind closed doors in court. A few nobles said this was a bad sign. Some people were wondering if the cubs would be healthy enough to be leaders one day. Some of them were probably already making plans and thinking about who might take the throne if the heirs died. A young attendant came up nervously. She was new to the palace staff and had just finished her training. Mira was her name, and she looked scared to be talking to the Empress. Your Majesty?" It was hard to hear her voice. Vorin turned quickly. "Don't bother the Empress unless, let her speak," Kara said. She would listen to anyone who might have an answer at this point. Mira had a hard time swallowing. "I saw something yesterday that made me think. It could be nothing, but I thought I should bring it up." "Go on." "I was in charge of the maintenance crews during the evening cleaning rotation. They were cleaning different parts of the palace. I was watching the nursery cameras when they went through Sector 7, and the cubs stopped crying. Only for a short time. About 10 minutes. But it was the most quiet they had been all day." The Chancellor Vorin's nose wrinkled in confusion. "Sector 7? That's just the part for cleaning. Rooms for storage and cleaning." "I know it sounds strange, Your Majesty," Mira said quickly. "But I looked at the timestamps. At 8:47 p.m. the cubs stopped making noise. At that time the night crew was moving through that area with their cleaning tools." Kara turned all the way around to look at the young attendant. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes, Your Majesty. At first I thought it might be a coincidence, but then I remembered that it had happened 2 nights before." During the evening maintenance cycle, the cubs calmed down for a few minutes. Kara felt a little bit of hope for the first time in days. It didn't make sense. What could janitors have that 12 trained professionals didn't? But at this point she was willing to try anything. Who was on that shift? Kara's voice suddenly became sharp and focused as she asked. Vorin took out a tablet and looked through the work schedules. Your Majesty, the night maintenance crew in Sector 7 is the human cleaning staff. People? Kara's eyes narrowed. 30 years ago the Empire took over the planet of humans and brought them into the Empire. People thought they were simple and primitive. Most of them did simple jobs like farming, building and cleaning. It seemed crazy that a person could do something that the Empire's best scientists couldn't. But her babies were dying. Find out exactly who was working in that area, Kara said. I want them to be found and brought to the palace right away. Your Majesty, Vorin said carefully, surely you don't think a human worker could. I don't care if they are human, robot or alien slug, Kara said, cutting him off. I'll take any chance they have to help my cubs no matter how small it is. Look for them. Now. Vorin bowed quickly. Yes, Your Majesty. Right away. Kara turned back to the window as he rushed off to look at the maintenance records. Her 3 little cubs were still crying in the nursery, and their voices were getting hoarse and weak. She put both of her paws on the glass and whispered, Hold on, my little ones. Please just wait a little longer. Jake Morrison had been cleaning the floors of the Valerian Palace for 3 years. As a kid, no one ever wanted to do this kind of work, but it was honest work. More importantly, it kept him out of the labor camps where most people went after Earth was taken over. People worked 16-hour shifts in those camps, mining minerals or building infrastructure for the Empire. Jake had a small room to himself in the palace, 3 meals a day, and sometimes he could sneak in a few hours of sleep between shifts. The job was easy enough. He cleaned the windows, mopped the floors, emptied the trash cans and made sure everything shone. The Valorians were very picky about how clean things were. Jake had learned exactly how they wanted things done, and they wanted their palace to shine like a jewel. He kept his head down, didn't talk unless someone else did, and did everything he could to stay out of sight. That was the most important thing for people to do in the Empire. Don't make any trouble. Don't stand out. Just blend in and get through each day. Jake almost jumped out of his skin when the door to his supply closet opened at 3 in the morning. There were 2 Imperial guards at the door. They were huge, at least 7 feet tall, and their dark armor seemed to soak up the light around them. It was hard to tell they were alive because their helmets covered their faces. Jake's first thought was to panic. What had he done wrong? Did he miss a spot while he was cleaning? Did he break something valuable by accident? He thought about the last few days and tried to remember any mistakes he might have made. You will come with us, one of the guards said. His voice was flat and emotionless, the kind of tone that didn't let people ask questions or argue. What did I do? Jake was able to stammer out. The guard said again, you will come with us, but didn't say why. Jake's heart was beating so fast that he could hear it in his ears. He shook his hands as he put down the mop he had been using. He thought about running away, but where would he go? There were walls and security systems all around the palace. There was no way out. As they led him through the palace, the guards walked on either side of him. Jake had worked here for 3 years, but he had only ever been in the service corridors and basement levels where the staff worked. Now, they were showing him parts of the palace that he had only seen in propaganda videos that were shown to workers during orientation. They walked through hallways with golden arches that looked like they were lit up by their own light. They walked by floating gardens where strange plants floated in the air with their roots dangling in nutrient mist. Everything was both beautiful and scary at the same time. This was the world of the rulers, not the world of the cleaners. Jake's old work boots squeaked on the shiny marble floors. He realized how dirty his uniform was, with stains from cleaning solutions and dust all over it. He probably smelled like disinfectant and floor wax. No matter what kind of trouble he was in, he was not dressed for it. At last, the guards came to a stop in front of 2 huge doors. When the light hit them, they sparkled with rainbow colors. They were made of some kind of white metal. The doors opened without making a sound, and Jake was pushed inside with a gentle but firm push. Jake had never seen anything like the throne room before. He could barely see the ceiling because it was so high and covered in what looked like stars. Tapestries showing the history of the Valerian Empire hung on the walls. Empress Kara herself was sitting on a raised platform at the other end of the room. Of course, Jake had seen pictures of her before. Everyone did. Screens all over the palace showed her, and she always looked strong and perfect. But the woman in front of him now didn't look anything like those pictures. Her silver fur, which usually looked so nice in the videos, looked messy and unkempt. She looked like she hadn't slept in days because her eyes were red and tired. She looked tired, and even worse, she looked worried. There were 3 clear cribs next to her, and inside them Jake could see 3 tiny cubs. They were moving around and making small crying sounds that echoed through the huge throne room. An object on the wall suddenly spoke English. Jake understood that it was a translator. The Empress was looking right at him. "You are Jake Morrison, the human janitor?" Jake's mouth was dry. He tried to talk, but at first nothing came out. He swallowed hard and tried again. "Why, is your majesty?" he said, his voice breaking. She stood up and walked closer to him. She looked even more powerful up close. She was almost 6 feet tall, had sharp claws, and her eyes seemed to look right through him. But there was something else in those eyes as well. "Pick up the cub on the left," she said. Carefully. Jake blinked. That was not one of the things he thought he would hear. "Your Majesty, I don't think I should." "Pick up the cub," she said again, this time in a clear command. Jake's hands were shaking so much that he wasn't sure he could hold anything. But he took his time walking over to the crib on the left and looking down. It was one of the smallest things he had ever seen inside. The cub's soft gray fur covered its body, and its little paws were kneading the air. It had its eyes closed and was crying in small, sad sounds that made Jake's heart break. He reached down very slowly, worried that he might hurt the little thing. When he touched the cub's warm fur with his fingers, something strange happened. The crying stopped for a while. Jake carefully picked up the cub and held its head like he used to do with his neighbor's baby back on Earth years ago. He held the cub against his chest, pressing it against his worn uniform. The cub stopped crying completely. It made a soft sound like a purr, and its little paws started to knead Jake's shirt. Jake could feel the little creature's heart beating fast against his hand. It was warm and soft. The soft purring sound was the only thing that could be heard in the throne room for a while. The other 2 cubs then started to cry even more. Their little paws were reaching up toward Jake as they moved in their cribs. "The others too," Empress Kara whispered, and Jake could hear how upset she was even though the translator was there. Jake didn't know what else to do. He didn't care that his boots were probably getting the floor dirty, so he sat down right there. An attendant carefully gave him the second cub while he was still holding the first one against his chest. Then the third. The 3 cubs all climbed on him right away. Their little claws got stuck in his uniform as they climbed over his lap, his arms, and even tried to get up to his shoulders. All 3 of them were purring now, and the throne room was filled with happy sounds. Jake changed his position and crossed his legs and arms to make a nest. The cubs got comfortable. One curled up in his lap, one tucked into his left arm, and one snuggled against his chest. They purred louder, which sounded like a small engine running. Their little bodies began to relax, and they began to breathe more slowly and deeply. All 3 cubs were sound asleep in just a few minutes. The throne room was very quiet, except for the soft breathing and purring of the sleeping cubs. Jake was too scared to move or even breathe too hard because he didn't want to wake them up. He looked up and saw Empress Kara looking at him with a look on her face that he couldn't quite figure out. Guards and attendants stood still around the room watching this strange scene. A janitor was sitting on the floor of the throne room, holding the 3 royal heirs who hadn't slept well in a week. Jake didn't know what was going on or why. He only knew that 3 tiny helpless creatures had finally stopped crying and were now peacefully sleeping in his arms. He stayed very still and waited to see what would happen next. Jake's new room was nothing like the basement dormitory where he had lived for 3 years. The old room was small and cramped, with 3 metal bunk beds stacked on top of each other and 20 other workers snoring and moving around all night. The lights always buzzed, even when they were supposed to be off, and the air always smelled like cleaning chemicals and sweat. The royal nursery was right next door to this new room. There was a Real bed with soft sheets, a private bathroom with hot water, and a window that looked out over the gardens of the palace. There was even a little sitting area with a chair that was comfortable. Jake kept thinking that someone would figure out they had made a mistake and send him back to the basement. "This is only for a short time," Chancellor Vorin had said to him stiffly on the first day, clearly not happy with the plan. "Just until the cubs don't need you anymore." Jake had nodded, not wanting to argue. He thought he would be here for a week or 2 at most. Surely the scientists who work for the royal family would find a way to fix things soon. But 2 weeks turned into 1. A month passed instead of 2 weeks. Jake didn't even realize it had been 3 months. Every day was the same. Jake would get up early around 5 a.m. and go to the nursery. The cubs would be awake and making little mewing sounds waiting for him. As soon as he walked in, they would get excited. Their little tails would stand straight up, and their paws would reach through the bars of their cribs to get to him. He would be with them all day, giving them their formula from bottles, but only if Jake was the one holding them. playing with them on the soft mats that were all over the nursery floor, putting them to sleep by rocking them, singing them the old songs his mother used to sing to him on Earth, even though the cubs didn't understand the words. The people who worked in the palace were both confused and interested in what was going on. Some of them looked at Jake with disgust that they tried to hide. He was a person, after all, and a member of a species that had been conquered. It seemed to upset something deep in their worldview that the royal heirs needed him and depended on him. But some people watched with what looked like curiosity or even sadness, as if they were seeing something they had lost a long time ago. Dr. Lyra came almost every day to do her tests. As the palace's chief xenobiologist, she looked into how different alien species worked. She was nicer than most of the Valorians Jake had met before. She didn't look at him like he was trash on the floor. She looked at him like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. She took Jake's blood at least once a week and always said she was sorry for the needle stick. She made him wear sensors on his wrists and chest that kept track of his heart rate and body temperature. One time she even made him wear a weird helmet that tracked his brain activity while he held the cubs. Dr. Lyra was looking over her data on a holographic display that floated in the air one night after the cubs had finally gone to sleep. Jake could see charts, graphs, and numbers that he didn't understand. They were all glowing in a soft blue light. "It's amazing," she said, shaking her head slowly. It looked like she was talking to herself more than to him. Jake was in the rocking chair, rocking back and forth slowly. The smallest cub was sleeping in his arms and making little snoring noises. Jake had been thinking of this one as Pip, but he hadn't told anyone the name out loud. It just seemed right. The little one always fell asleep first and woke up last. "What's so special?" Jake asked in a low voice so he wouldn't wake Pip. Dr. Lyra turned to look at him. Her face showed a mix of shock and what might have been regret. "Your physiology," she said. "Your body temperature is about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. When you're not doing anything, your heart rate is between 60 and 80 beats per minute. You might not understand these numbers, but I do. They're amazing." Jake said, "I don't get it." He carefully moved Pip around in his arms, making sure to support the cub's head. Dr. Lyra sat down in the chair next to him. She looked tired, like she had been working hard to figure all of this out. "Let me tell you something about my people," she said. "The Valerian species made a choice about 3,000 years ago. We had advanced technology, genetic engineering, and the power to change ourselves at the most basic level. We did." She brought up another holographic display that looked like a strand of DNA. "We made ourselves better," she said. "We got rid of the biological differences that we thought were unnecessary. We made sure that everyone reacted the same way to stress so that we would all be safe. We got rid of what our ancestors called primitive pack behaviors, like needing physical touch, being comforted by irregular heartbeats, and feeling warm body heat that changes slightly across the skin." Jake tried to keep up as he listened. Pip moved a little in his arms, and Jake automatically rocked a little more and hummed softly. "We thought we were making ourselves better," Dr. Lyra said, and she sounded sad now. "Better at getting things done. More advanced. We got rid of everything we thought was keeping us from being a better species." She pointed to the sleeping cubs in their cribs and Pip sleeping soundly in Jake's arms. "But those so-called primitive responses are still needed for infant development. Cubs are born with certain expectations. The caregiver's skin feels different temperatures. The heart rate is a little irregular. It speeds up when you move and slows down when you rest. Even scent, which is the natural smell of a living thing that changes a little bit during the day." Jake looked at Pip. The little cub was completely at ease, and its little paws twitched a little as it dreamed. "These things trigger instinctual comfort responses in infants," Dr. Lyra said. "It's how they know they're safe. It's how they get close. But we Valorians made all of that happen ourselves. Our body temperature stays the same and is controlled. Our heartbeats are always the same. We even use technology to hide our natural smells." She got up and walked to the window to look out at the gardens. "We can make perfect temperature pods, synthesize comfort sounds, and make pheromone diffusers. But we can't make what you give them just by holding them. We forgot how to do the one thing that is most important to a baby. We forgot how to just be real, warm, and alive." Jake sat still thinking about this. "So you mean that just being human is helping them?" "Exactly," Dr. Lyra said, turning back to face him. "Something we forgot how to do." The words hung in the air between them. Jake looked around the nursery at all the high-tech, expensive gear that was supposed to be able to do everything. None of it worked as well as him sitting in a chair and holding a small animal that needed to feel a heartbeat. Jake had given all three of the cubs names by the time they were 3 months old, at least in his own mind. Pip, the smallest one, was always the quietest and the first to fall asleep. He named the middle one Max. He was a little more active and loved to play. He named the biggest one Luna, who was very stubborn and wouldn't eat until Jake sang to her. At first he never said the names out loud. These were, after all, the royal heirs. They probably already had long, complicated, and meaningful Valerian names that were official. What right did he have to give them simple names? But one day while he was playing with them on the floor, Max grabbed his shoelace and pulled on it with all his might. Jake laughed and said, "Come on Max, that's not a toy." He didn't think about it. The cub looked up at him and made a happy chirping sound, which made him think it knew its name. Empress Kara, who had been watching from the door, said nothing from across the room. Jake did see the tiniest smile on her face before she turned and walked away. Jake used the names more freely after that. Pip, Max and Luna. The cubs seemed to know them because they came when he called. And if the Empress didn't like that her heirs were using human names, she never said anything. Jake had been sleeping lightly ever since he moved into the room next to the nursery. He was still aware of the cubs even in his dreams. He woke up right away when he heard the strange electronic buzzing sound at 2 in the morning. In the dark, his eyes opened quickly. It was wrong that the sound was coming from the nursery. Everything is wrong. It wasn't the usual hum of the environmental controls or the soft glow of the lights at night. This noise was harsh and crackling, like machines being forced to do something they weren't meant to do. Jake got out of bed and ran to the door that connected his room to the nursery. He was about to grab the handle when he heard the lock click open from the other side. Someone was getting around the security system. Jake's blood froze when the door slid open. There were 4 people in the nursery who hadn't been there a moment before. They must have had some kind of stealth technology because they seemed to appear out of nowhere. They were wearing dark armor from head to toe that absorbed the light around them, making them look like holes in reality. They all had weapons that glowed with a sickly blue light. "Secure the heirs," one of them said, his voice muffled by his helmet. "Get rid of the person." The cubs were already awake, and their screams of terror filled the nursery. They were old enough to know when something was wrong, and they knew these people were not friendly. Jake didn't think. He just moved. He dove toward the emergency alarm panel on the wall, reaching for the red button that would let the palace guards know something was wrong. A burst of blue energy shot past his head so close that he could feel the heat. It hit the wall behind him and left a black mark that was smoking. He hit the alarm with his hand, and a loud siren started to sound throughout the palace. But it would take the guards a while to get there, and the intruders were already there, heading toward the cribs where Pip, Max and Luna were screaming in fear. In that moment something happened to Jake. It wasn't a choice made on purpose or with courage. It was something deeper, something that came from a place that wasn't thought. For 6 months these 3 cubs had relied on him. He had given them food, rocked them to sleep and sung to them when they cried. They weren't just his job or his duty. They belonged to him. And no one was going to hurt them. Jake's fear left his body, and in its place came a burning rage that felt like fire in his veins. He stared at the attacker who was closest to him and was reaching for Max's crib. Jake grabbed the first thing he saw, which was a metal feeding stand that held the cubs' bottles. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was heavy and strong. He swung it like a baseball bat with all his might. The blow knocked the attacker back. His helmet broke and he fell to the ground and didn't move. "Leave them alone." Jake yelled and he could barely hear his own voice. It was raw and primal, like the sound of someone who had been pushed to their breaking point. Another attacker lunged at the cribs trying to get past Jake. Jake didn't think twice before jumping in between them. He felt the stun blast hit his left shoulder and it hurt like getting hit by lightning. The whole left side of his body went numb and started to hurt at the same time. His arm was hanging uselessly at his side. Jake, on the other hand, did not stop. He couldn't stop. The cubs were still screaming, and that sound made the pain go away like nothing else could. He swung the metal stand with one hand and hit another attacker in the chest. The man fell back and Jake hit him over and over until he fell to the ground. A third attacker tried to go around and head for Luna's crib. Jake let go of the feeding stand and just tackled him and they both fell to the ground. They rolled on the floor and Jake fought harder than he ever had before. No plan or technique, just pure desperation and protective rage. He put his strong arm around the attacker's neck and squeezed as hard as he could. The man fought to get away but Jake held on. The cub's cries filled his ears and gave him strength he didn't know he had. The attacker's struggles got weaker and finally stopped. Jake didn't let go. He kept the chokehold on until he was sure the man was out cold. The fourth attacker had been waiting, but now Jake saw him make a choice. The human was supposed to be easy to kill, but 3 of his team were already dead and the alarm was still going off. Jake could hear the sound of running feet and shouted orders through the broken window. The Imperial guards were on their way. The last attacker ran to the window, jumped through it, and disappeared into the night. Jake fell against the cribs and his whole body shook. His left arm was still numb and hurt. He could feel something warm and wet running down his face. When he wiped it with his good hand, it came away red. Blood. He had a cut above his eye, but he didn't remember getting it. The cubs were still crying and their little voices were hoarse from all the screaming. Jake reached into the cribs even though he was hurt, his shoulder hurt, and the room was spinning because he was dizzy. Pip jumped up on his lap right away, and then Max and Luna did the same. They were shaking, and their tiny claws dug into his shirt as they pressed against him. "It's okay," Jake said in a shaky voice. "You're safe. I've got you. No one is going to hurt you." The cubs started licking his face, and their rough tongues found the blood above his eye. It should have hurt, but for some reason it made me feel better. They were looking after him and checking on him in the only way they knew how. The door to the nursery flew open, and Imperial guards rushed in with their weapons drawn. When they saw what was going on, they froze. 3 attackers are on the floor, one with a broken helmet and the other barely breathing. A broken window. And Jake Morrison, the human janitor, was sitting against the cribs with all 3 royal heirs holding on to him. His face was bloody and his arm was useless at his side. Empress Kara got there a few minutes later, and she moved faster than Jake had ever seen her move. With one look she took in the whole scene. The broken nursery. Her guards are keeping the unconscious attackers safe. And Jake, hurt and bleeding, still holding her cubs like a shield. Her face went completely still and her look was cold and scary. Jake had never really seen her angry before. But this wasn't just rage. This was rage beyond words. "Chancellor Vorin," she said in a cold voice. "Get ready to write a decree." Jake couldn't remember much of the next 3 days. His shoulder took a while to heal from the stun blast, and the doctors had to put his arm in a brace. The cut above his eye needed stitches. But the worst part was not being able to be with the cubs while he got better. He could hear them crying from the nursery, not wanting to eat or sleep. After a day and a half, Empress Kara finally told the medical team to bring Jake to the nursery in a wheelchair. As soon as the cubs saw him, they climbed all over him, which made his injuries hurt more. Jake was told to wear formal clothes on the 3rd day. They gave him clothes that had been made just for him, and they were clearly in a hurry. It fit pretty well, but it felt strange and stiff compared to his normal work clothes. His left arm was still in the medical brace, which was strapped across his chest. Guards took him to the Grand Hall, where all of the Imperial court was waiting for him. There were hundreds of Valerian nobles in the room, and their fine clothes and jewelry sparkled in the light. Everyone turned to look at Jake when he walked in, and the whispers started right away. Empress Kara stood on the raised platform at the front of the hall, where the throne was. Next to her were the 3 cubs, who were being held by attendants but were squirming and reaching for Jake. Jake walked up to the Empress and stood in front of her. His legs were weak and his shoulder hurt, but he kept his back straight. The translator made sure that Jake could hear Empress Kara's voice clearly and strongly. "I give Jake Morrison the title of Royal Pack Guardian, with all the rights and privileges of the inner household, by imperial authority and in recognition of his extraordinary service and unwavering loyalty." There was a lot of noise in the room. Some nobles were angry and others were shocked. How could a person who was part of a conquered species get such a title? It had never happened before. It was a slap in the face to the rich. But Empress Kara's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "No one should question his place in this palace or his bond with the heirs. This person fought off 4 armed attackers with his bare hands to keep my cubs safe. He has earned this honor with his blood." Her eyes moved over the gathered nobles, and the room seemed to get colder. "My word is law. Does anyone want to fight it?" The room went quiet. No one had the guts to say anything. An attendant brought out a ceremonial sash that only high-ranking members of the royal family wear. They carefully draped it over Jake's good shoulder, making sure it didn't get in the way of his hurt arm. As soon as the ceremony was over, the attendants let the cubs go. They all ran toward Jake, tripping over each other in their excitement. Pip sat on his good shoulder, Max settled in the crook of his braced arm, and Luna wrapped herself around his ankle as they climbed up his legs. They immediately started playing with the ceremonial sash, pulling on it with their tiny teeth like it was a new toy. Jake looked down at them, and even though he was in pain, shocked, and had hundreds of angry eyes on him, he smiled. He was still just a guy who mopped floors. But somehow he was also the royal pack guardian now. And the reason was 3 little cubs who wouldn't sleep anywhere but in his lap. It had been 20 years since that night in the nursery. Jake Morrison was 73 years old now. His white hair shone in the light of the setting sun. His hands, which were resting on the arms of his chair, were old and had scars on them. He moved slower these days and his back wasn't as straight as it used to be, but his eyes were still sharp and clear. He sat in his favorite spot in the palace gardens, a quiet corner with an old stone bench covered in flowering vines. He came here most evenings now to watch the sun set over the capital city of Valoria. The towers and spires shone in shades of orange and gold, and the sky changed colors that Earth's sky had never been able to do before. Before he saw anyone, Jake heard the footsteps. He had learned to tell the sound of Valerian feet on garden paths after all these years. He would know these footsteps anywhere. "Still sneaking up on your old pack guardian?" he called out without turning around. A smile was already forming on his weathered face. The laugh that answered him was warm and real, and it made Jake's heart feel good. When Crown Princess Luna came into view, Jake felt the same sense of wonder that he always did when he looked at her. She was an adult, almost 7 feet tall, and her silver fur shone in the light of the setting sun. She wore the formal robes that came with her job, which were decorated with symbols of her house and her achievements. She was beautiful and strong, and she looked like she would be an empress one day. But when she looked at Jake, her eyes were just as warm as they had been when she was a little cub and wouldn't sleep unless he was holding her. Her brothers showed up next to her. Max, the middle one, was always the most active. He was whiter than his brothers and sisters, had darker fur, and smiled quickly. And Pip, the smallest of the three, grew up to be the tallest, quietest, and most thoughtful person. Max pulled up one of the garden chairs and sat down next to Jake. "We wanted to know what you thought," he said. He shouldn't have been sitting so casually in front of a lower-ranking court member, but after 20 years, those kinds of rules seemed silly to them. Luna sat down on the stone bench across from Jake and said, "The council is fighting back again. They say that making the Pack Guardian program open to all human volunteers is too much." Jake made a noise that was somewhere between laughing and not believing. "When I first started, they said it was too much to let one person near royalty. Look at how that turned out." Pip, who had stayed standing, spoke in a calm voice. "There are now human Pack Guardians in every noble home in 3 parts of the Empire. They have been asked for by 742 families. There are more than 2,000 names on the waiting list. And the results speak for themselves," Max said, leaning forward with excitement. "Families are learning again what it means to bond. Instead of relying only on technology, parents are spending more time with their kids. In homes with Pack Guardians, childhood development scores have gone up by 40%. Jake listened to all of this with his old hands on his lap. He was still amazed at how far things had come sometimes. He thought back to the beginning, when he was the only person allowed in the upper levels of the palace. The looks, the whispers, and the barely hidden disgust from some of the nobles. But over time things had changed. Other families had seen that the royal cubs were healthier, happier, and better adjusted than cubs raised in the usual way. They had begun to ask questions. Dr. Lyra had written about her research, which showed the science behind why humans were such good caregivers for Valerian babies. The council didn't want to do it at first. They had made rules, limits, and requirements. But the need kept getting bigger. 20 years later, human Pack Guardians were changing Valerian society. "All because you 3 refused to sleep anywhere but in a janitor's lap," Jake said with a grin at Luna. She laughed and did something that would have shocked the nobles if they had seen it. She lay down on the ground at Jake's feet, just like she used to do when she was a cub. Her formal robes lay on the grass around her. She said softly, "You were never just a janitor, Jake. You were there for us when we needed family." Jake reached down with his rough hand and gently scratched behind her ear, just like he had done when she was little. "I just held you. That's all I did." Pip said in a low voice, "That's not all you did. You reminded the Empire of something we had forgotten. That being efficient is not the same as loving. That technology can't take the place of being there. That sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is just spend time with them and be nice to them." Max nodded. "The council will agree to the expansion. We will check on it tomorrow. Anyone who wants to be a Pack Guardian will have the chance to do so. And every Valerian family will be able to get one if they want to." Jake heard the next morning that the council had unanimously approved the expansion. The council realized that their objections weren't as important as they thought they were when the 3 royal heirs made their position clear. After that, the program grew quickly. People who had been working as janitors, farmers, and construction workers all found new jobs. They learned simple things, not complicated theories or advanced techniques. How to safely hold a baby. How to tell when a cub needed to be comforted and when it needed to play. How to be warm, present, and patient. Jake sat on his garden bench and watched everything happen. He was too old to do much more than give advice and support. But he was proud to see these people learn what he had learned 20 years ago. That their greatest gift was not their strength or hard work, but their ability to care for others in a simple and real way. 5 years went by. Jake turned 78 and then 79. He knew that his health was getting worse. He got tired quickly and some mornings it was hard to get out of bed. But he had a good life, one he could never have imagined when he was cleaning floors in the basement of the palace. Jake went to bed one night in his room next to what used to be the royal nursery. It had been turned into a memorial room. He shut his eyes and didn't wake up. He died peacefully and quietly in the place where he had lived for 25 years. Everyone in the empire was sad. It was unheard of for a person to get such an honor, but Jake Morrison was not just any person. The flags at the palace were at half-mast. Businesses were closed for a day of remembrance. And thousands of Valorians, from nobles to regular workers, came to pay their respects. Empress Luna, who was already on the throne, oversaw the building of a monument. It was put in the main square of the palace so that everyone who came would see it. The statue was made of bronze and was the same size as a person. It showed a man in a plain janitor's uniform. He sat with his legs crossed and 3 small cubs sleeping peacefully in his lap and arms. The artist had perfectly captured Jake's face, with its kind eyes, gentle smile, and hands that had held so many cubs over the years. It was written in both Valerian and English so everyone could read it. It said, "True strength lies not in what we build but in what we remember." Jake Morrison, who taught an empire how to hold its children again, is buried here. There was a second plaque below the main one that was added later. In small, neat letters, it listed names, thousands of them. These were the human pack guardians who were now working in the Valerian Empire. There were 10,000 names on the plaque when it was first put up, and every year more names are added. They used to be janitors just like Jake. Farm workers who had spent their whole lives working in the fields. Construction workers who built the empire's buildings by hand. People who worked in factories as mechanics or as cooks, all of whom had found something amazing about themselves. Their best gift wasn't in their backs or in their ability to work long hours at hard jobs. It was in their arms, how they could hold a scared cub and make it feel safe. In their hearts, in their ability to care without needing to know why. A lot of people came to see the statue, especially Valerian parents with their cubs. They would tell their kids the story of Jake Morrison, the man who changed everything. The cubs would ask their parents questions about the bronze figure, and their parents would answer. Weapons and war had not helped people defeat the Valorians. They didn't use violence or rebellion to get rid of their conquerors. They had done something much stronger and longer lasting. They had taught the Valorians how to love their kids again. They had taught an advanced civilization that progress isn't just about moving forward. It's also about remembering what you left behind. And it all started because 3 little cubs wouldn't sleep in the best nursery in the whole galaxy. They only wanted one thing, something simple that couldn't be replaced. They wanted to be held by someone who cared, whose heartbeat was real and alive, and who had a heart that beat a little bit differently. They wanted Jake Morrison, the janitor who became a guardian, then a teacher and finally a legend. His legacy wasn't in buildings, battles, or great ideas. It was shown by the thousands of cubs who peacefully slept in the arms of people who cared for them. In the families that had learned to put down their phones and pick up their kids. In an empire that had found something it had lost in its quest for perfection. The simple, one-of-a-kind gift of a soft touch and an open heart.